of the coalition 2016 have failed and in fact betrayed the expectations of Gambians. He would be in a better position to make that argument. But the House rules today are simple. Each of them, beginning with Dr. Ismail Assisi, will have 15 minutes to argue their point. At the end of the 15 minutes, each of them will answer questions for 2 minutes. Each of them can also borrow 2 minutes 3 times. Sometimes you are in the middle of an answer, the 2 minutes is exhausted, but the answer is not quite complete. So they can borrow 2 minutes, but only 3 times during the debate. If they say I borrow 2 minutes, that means they'll have an extension of 2 minutes once, twice, and 3 times to the end. And we'd like to thank Saul Fraser of Global Properties, present today. And this, I think, is the way forward. Dr. Ismail Assisi, we will begin with you with your first 15 minutes. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Haruna. Thank you for successes and failures of Coalition 2016 and mapping a way forward. I also take this opportunity to thank all media houses present here today, but also equally extend sincere gratitude to Honorable Halifa Sallah for accepting the invitation and willing to join this discussion. I don't think there is any better person than the Honorable to come and discuss and diagnose with precision the coalition. I think everybody knows that Honorable is the architect of the coalition, so I thank him for that. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank him for his leadership during that very difficult period we call the impasse, by instilling hope and holding the fort for the runaway president. Today we're here today to discuss the Coalition 2016. I think this is important. The political season has started. In 2016, after many attempts, political parties came together to pool their resources and their energy and their knowledge and their political capital to play the qualifying rounds. They qualified, but could not make it to the final to win the trophy. So therefore, it's important to know why, so that, because every Gambian, most Gambians, are talking about possible coalitions. It's important to know why the 2016 coalition failed, so we can learn lessons and avoid such mistakes in the future. Note that this is not a competition. This is an exchange of ideas. Both myself and the Honorable will learn from each other, and I believe the public watching from home will also learn from us. We will leave this hall today with no victors. I will not be a victor, I will not be vanquished. The Honorable will not be victor or vanquished, but I think every Gambian will be victor today after this event. Political parties should nurture the culture of what I call the 4 C's: to coexist, to consult, to cooperate, and to challenge. But when they challenge each other on the basis of the exchange of ideas, ideas that can help transform this country. This gives voters the opportunity to weigh different solutions to the country's very many complex problems and make informed choices at the polls. So I hope this will be seen as the first of many to take place in this country. I, for one, will not vote for any party whose leader doesn't want to come and face Gambians to tell us how you want to govern the country if you are entrusted. There will be no job for you if you don't want to come for an interview. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2016, in fact, before I go further, I'd like to thank all coalition members, not only the Honorable, for forming a united front in 2016. Their efforts paid somehow, because we are here today in this hall to debate Gambian politics because of the sacrifices they made. So thank you to all the coalition members. In 2016, opposition parties put their differences aside. They came together and formed a united front to remove Jammeh and initiate reforms that could put this country on a path towards democracy and development, in particular consolidate democracy and also promote the rule of law. To succeed and to achieve their goals, the coalition produced a manifesto promising to implement corrective programs of activities that were very appealing. But even though the coalition succeeded in removing President Jammeh, it is my argument that the second task, which is the most important, was shortcoming and it was a failure. That is, the agenda, as published in the coalition manifesto, and the reforms they promised to do, they were not successful in doing that. It is also my contention that this was a collective failure of the coalition members. The coalition established 2 documents. I think when you do some research, you'll realize perhaps it's 3. That's what they call a draft MOU, which was not signed. And once it's not signed, it's just a draft, it's just a memorandum. I don't know whether we can call it a memorandum of understanding. I think Honorable can help us with that. That's also called what they call the 17th October Agreement, which was signed, obviously. But also there's what they call the Coalition Manifesto. This was in line, or these instruments, these documents, were established for 2 purposes, or to help the coalition achieve its 2 purposes. The first one was what? To change government through peaceful means. And the second one was to create an enabling environment for elections in a free and fair playing field. So what happened to the agreement? The agreement was fragile from the beginning. For example, there were fundamental provisions in the agreement which states that the person who will be elected as the flag bearer will resign from his or her party. The second one was that the person to be elected will give a commitment to serve for only 3 years and then step down to resignation, after which we will hold elections where she or he will not contest. However, the coalition members did not anticipate a potential breach of agreement and therefore could not create clear statutory or other legal mechanisms to ensure the terms of the agreement were enforceable. Now, the honorable members also did not test the courts to test the limits of our judicial system like Sid Mati and his colleagues are doing, to take Barrow to court for a breach of agreement. Because for me, the agreement was legally binding. It's a written contract, and it's valid and therefore enforceable. It means that when parties sign a written contract, they are expected to fulfill their obligations under it. Now, for a written agreement to be legally binding, it must contain an acceptance of the contract terms in the document. The most common way to achieve this is through a signature. And as far as I know, and as far as I am concerned, and the Honorable can attest to that, President Adama Barrow, with 3 other coalition candidates, those who contested it in the convention, signed this agreement. I read a press release by the party, DOI, on 9 October 2019, which states that, I quote, the strategic objective was to, that is of the coalition, the strategic objective of the coalition was to put an end to self-perpetuating rule by the voluntary acceptance of the coalition-sponsored candidate to serve a 3-year term and preside over a free and fair election in which he or she would not participate or give support to any candidate. Can you please underline in bold, voluntary? DOI is saying that the objective was to put an end to self-perpetuating rule by a voluntary acceptance of the person who was going to be elected as the flag bearer. Now, why sign an agreement where compliance is voluntary? That should have been a gentleman's agreement. In order to sign an agreement, if compliance is voluntary, and that is my argument. In fact, another top coalition member was quoted to say on April 5th that the agreement was a gentleman's agreement, which I also think that was in the case, because the agreement was signed. It means that you give your consent that you will fulfill the obligations of the agreement. Let me hasten to note that nothing was wrong with this clause in the Constitution, that the person to be elected as the flag bearer should resign after 3 years. Nothing is wrong with that. Because why? As in Section 63 of the Constitution, it provides for a 5-year term, while Section 65 of the same Constitution provides for the resignation of the end, before the end of the 5-year term. So even though you are elected for 5 years, there is nothing wrong in you resigning after 2 weeks or after 5 years or after 3 years. So nothing was wrong with that provision in the agreement. But it was also the responsibility of the coalition members to hold that person to account. But as we all know, no attempt was made by coalition partners, either individually or collectively, to hold him for account for breach of contract or for breach of agreement. Let's briefly look at the agenda, because removing the incumbent was one goal. The most difficult and most important was to govern, to change this country, change the institutions, reform the institutions. In the coalition manifesto, promises were made. They call it the agenda. The agenda was published, and reforms were promised to be implemented on issues such as education, health, governance, economic reforms, human rights, and justice. Now, some of the promises made in the agenda that were seen to be fundamental for the democratization process were not fully implemented. I'll give examples. Number one, the agenda promised that they will establish a body of jurists and competent personalities to review the Constitution with a view to cleansing it of all provisions which are inimical to democracy and the rule of law. What we saw was not that. What we saw was wholesale change of a constitution by spending $116 million, and it didn't get anywhere. But I would also like to give credit to Honorable who raised this issue in Parliament, but he wasn't listened to. The other promise was that in tune with Section 39 of the 97 Constitution,
2
and
minutes,
also
Dr.
Section
Ceesay.
11.
2 minutes.
2 minutes to go.
Yeah.
of the 15 minutes?
Yes, sir.
Okay, can I borrow my 2 minutes then?
Yes, you can borrow your first 2 minutes now.
Yeah, so, okay, then I'll have to move. But there was an agenda which promised to do certain things. Now let's come to why I think the coalition failed to implement the promises they made. One was leadership. The leadership that was provided during the impasse was not matched when it was needed after the impasse. What we saw was that the architect of the coalition, which is the Honorable, he kind of laid back a bit, and that left the coalition void of leadership. And I think every Gambian wants to even know. I take this opportunity to ask Honorable whether he was offered any cabinet post. I think we all want to know that. But also, if he was offered, why didn't he take it? Why did he opt to go to assembly instead of cabinet? Also, I think the coalition failed to defend the coalition members. Why? Because the coalition was undermined by a few people. I'll give examples. One prominent member was in Dakar and said that he had sacked another prominent member who was the spokesperson. He was sacked as the spokesperson. The other one was what? Another prominent member said that the president should go for 5 years instead of 3, and anybody who doesn't like it should go to the courts, and that was not defended by the coalition members. But also, when the first victim of the president, that is the Minister of Interior, was sacked by the president, the coalition members did not challenge the president to say you are violating the principles of the coalition, which is that you must appoint all 5 ministers in consultation.
Into the borrowed 2 minutes now, sir.
Constitutional coalition executive committee, but that wasn't even set up, and there was also no secretariat. So that was also a problem that happened as well. So the coalition was not defended. So we could see from the onset that there were power struggles within the coalition as well. Also, if we were part of the coalition that time, we would have had the foresight to plan for a legislative governance framework, which was not there. And it brought the argument of tactical alliance and coalition alliance, which rendered Parliament almost in a state whereby it was highly polarized, and today we saw what happened, and one of the victims was the Constitution. So, finally, every Gambian put their trust in the coalition to change this country. That is why we voted. We exchanged our votes for the promise they gave us, and then every Gambian also took part and helped the coalition that led the crusade. Therefore, collectively, we applaud them. But in my opinion, they failed to finish the job, a job that they promised to the Gambian people, and failed to defend and promote the interest of the coalition, and oversights and mistakes led to monumental failures with far-reaching consequences for our democracy. They failed to replace the bad system. They sought to change with a better one, and all the reforms that they promised either were not initiated or they failed. And all members are responsible for this failure in my argument. To move on and to have trust from the population, I think members should acknowledge that there were shortcomings, accept it, accept the weaknesses, take collective responsibility. That is what leaders do. When there is success, they give credit. When there is failure or weakness, they come out and take responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ismail Assisi, Citizens Alliance Political Party. Now, Honorable Halifa Sallah will have an opportunity to respond in his view if, in fact, Coalition 2016 have failed the Gambian people, or was the success it was designed to be. Honorable Sallah, the floor is yours.
Every analysis must take context into consideration. You must have the point at issue interrogated, gather the evidence in order to pass judgment. Unfortunately, and maybe the Honorable Dr. Ceesay will clear that point, I don't think he has ever read even the coalition agreement. I may be wrong. But his premise will either indicate that he has not read it or does not want to fully explain its essence. The context. Here is a document called Opposition Parties' Proposals and Demands for Electoral and Constitutional Reform in the Gambia, 7 April 2015. This was sent to the President, to ECOWAS, to all international organizations. After that, on the 20th of July, 2015, the executive came with this act to amend the Elections Act. And Section 43 decided to increase the deposits to 500,000 from 10,000 for presidential candidates, 50,000 against 5,000 for National Assembly members, 50,000 against 2,500 for mayors and chairpersons, and then 10,000 against 1,250 for councillors. 48 constituencies multiplied by the 50,000. You can see that there was a deliberate attempt to make it impossible for the opposition to survive. And I will not mention the other additives. So the response of the executive was that it will not engage in electoral reform. What followed? All of you are witnesses to what PDOIS proposed in 2015, if proper research has been done. We indicated in our agenda 2016, published in 2015, and here I will be willing to give it to Honorable Dr. Ceesay, where it talks about strategy for 2016. The agenda analyzed that it was the deliberate attempt of the government to frustrate the opposition. And the opposition responded in 2012 by not participating in the elections, National Assembly elections, unless there was electoral reform. The presidential election indicated very clearly that the opposition could not remove the government from office by each political party being on its own. The result, 17% for UDP, 11% for the United Front. That was the result of the presidential election. The vote of the UDP was declining. Of course, the United Front was rising, but together is just 27%, which is what the UDP had in the 2006 presidential election. So we saw electoral reform to be absolute must. We called for it. We refused to participate unless it was done in 2012. And PDOIS analyzed the results of the 2012 National Assembly elections, where you had 48 seats, only 23 seats were contested. And out of those seats, you had result 80,000 for the APRC and 60,000 for the independent. Plus the 14,000 NRP, you had only a difference of less than 7,000. Showing that the APRC, regarding the popular vote, did not have that full control of the population, especially when we took into consideration that over 790-something thousand were supposed to participate, only 23 constituencies participated, numbering about 300-something thousand, and out of those 300-something thousand, only 150-something thousand participated in the National Assembly elections. We had 5 people who were not APRC, 4 independent, 1 NRP. So moving forward, DOI analyzed that if we are to participate in the 2016 election, we must insist on electoral reform, failing which we must build a coalition. So essentially, that is history. Now, looking at the coalition, in September, I was elected as a presidential candidate. We saw the temperature. The leader of the UDP was in prison. Gambians abroad felt that there was no way of changing this country except to overthrow the government. The temperature was rising, and DOI saw the need to implement its tactical objective. Have been very easy wherever the opposition met to say, well, they are preparing for something else other than election. Because the person who was in power never believed that no right-thinking opposition would ever think that you can remove him through the ballot box. I knew very clearly that he will know everything that is happening at Kerr. And by virtue of that, he will simply say, well, these people, leave them. That was the Achilles heel. Leave them. And we met. The beginning was not a coalition of parties. It was a coalition of the presidential candidates and then involved their parties. 6 presidential candidates were ready to participate. For the sake of time, we all know them. We convened the meeting. Only 2 sent the presidential candidates. Rest sent their representatives. For 2 weeks, the discussion continued until we saw an opening. Eventually, a group calling itself Inter-Party Committee met me and indicated that, well, they were interested in what was happening at Kerr. It was very clear then that they could also be incorporated in the discussion. Another woman, I do not need to mention names, also had always been writing to the opposition parties for coalition. We saw the need to involve the woman in the second phase. And finally, I contacted Honorable Dembo Boya to emphasize the need for the organization we have established, the opposition parties for GOFA, that is opposition parties for electoral reform. Opposition parties for electoral reform, GOFA, to convene a meeting of all the members so that we can start the process of coalition building. That was done. We had these independent civil society representatives to participate. But ultimately, the answer to your question is this. The coalition started the process of being built on the 14th of October. We met on the 17th to prepare the agreement. You will question me about the agreement. I will show you what is there. All it mentioned is that we agreed to put the past behind us and come together to be able to have delegates, 10 representatives, in order to have a coalition building process. What was mentioned in the agreement is that we will have a committee on good governance, committee on national convention, committee on democracy and rule of law, committee on justice and human rights. We had committees. The committees met, made recommendations. We adopted the recommendation. These 3 years that you've mentioned became part of those recommendations. We participated in elections with the view to prevent the deterioration of the peace of the country. Insults everywhere, attacks everywhere. Gambia was in flames. We all know it. So the purpose of the coalition was to ensure that we bring about a change that will prevent Gambia from disintegration. That was the fundamental objective. The other objectives are collateral objectives, but the key objective was to ensure that we prevent Gambia from disintegration. And that succeeded. On the 30th of October, we selected a presidential candidate. I was a presidential aspirant. Why did I accept? Because failure to accept, the incumbent would have still been there. That would not have been a way of attaining our objectives. We decided to campaign on a platform of one Gambia, one nation, one people. And the coalition succeeded before the vast majority of people even knew what was in a manifesto. The Gambian people supported the coalition because they were convinced that where Gambia was heading would lead to disintegration.
2 minutes, Honorable Sallah.
So in that respect, if we look at context, there is not a single Gambian here who would say that before October 30th, he or she believed that change will come through the ballot box on the 1st of December 2016. Not a single Gambian other than those who had the tactical objectives of building a coalition. So I must say that in that respect, for the country to change through the ballot box for the first time in its history, 52 years of history, nobody can say that the coalition did not attain the objective for which it was established. Now we must go, and through the question that will be asked, into the context of nation building after the victory. Why did it take the shape that it did? 25th of December, prior to taking over on the 19th, we established the fact that the constitutional legitimacy was the primary objective to be defended. Electoral legitimacy, primary objective to be defended. We defended that through the impasse and stabilized the country and ensure a change of power through peaceful means. That is the second attainment of the strategic objective of the coalition, to ensure transfer of power through peaceful means. On the 19th, the president assumed office. On the 21st...
Time, Honorable.
Can I borrow 2 minutes and conclude?
Yes, you can borrow your first 2 minutes as well.
So in that sense, then, we have seen that trajectory of a country changing without any looting, without any killing, without any war, no invasion by ECOMIG. They were received as forces of solidarity rather than force of invasion, as we have seen in 1981. Who on earth would say that the coalition failed in that respect? So all the objectives for which the coalition was established were actually attained. And finally, we had to go to the second stage, where the coalition needed another memorandum of understanding, which it never signed. If you want to know why it wasn't signed, and the implications, the contradiction within the coalition, I believe that is what we are here to interrogate. But as far as fundamental objective is concerned, the coalition led the Gambia to change office to the ballot box in peace.
Thank you very much, Honorable Sallah. We have gone through the first part. I'd like to introduce Keba Kamara of Keba Kacha and Keba Kamara Kabefo, so that members of the press here present, please, you can go through Keba, because he will be moderating the question and answer. Not yet, sir, not yet, but he'll be moderating the question and answer session with the press. So Adama, please provide him a microphone as well. But I think it is only fair that I give 5 minutes each so they react to each other's deliberations. Would this be fair, Honorable Sallah? Doctor? Okay, so I'll give you the first 5 minutes to react to his deliberations, and then we'll have him also 5 minutes to yours.
Now, it is no surprise that I did not read the coalition agreement, because the coalition agreement, even those who signed it, don't have access to it. One of the failures of the coalition is that they fail to ensure that they make enough copies so that every signatory has his or her own copy, and it's nowhere to be found online. The only thing online is a draft, like I said, a draft MOU. If you read PDOIS Gonga, the specific objectives of the coalition are clearly stated, that it is 2 phases. So I disagree that it has achieved its goal by initiating peaceful change, but not going further to create the enabling environment for an election in a level playing field. That is not going to happen this election. We still have a president in State House who is still using the power of incumbency. There is no new constitution, no new electoral laws, no new civil service reform, no security sector reform. So how can we call that success? Yes, they've achieved one goal, getting into the tournament by qualifying through the primaries, but failed to do good, to try and get to the finals and win the trophy. So what does that mean? They have to go back to relegation and start again and remove another incumbent who is using the same instruments, the same institutions, the same laws as the predecessor. So for me, that is not success. Honorable also, it seems like he agrees with me to some extent that they have failed, in the sense that he did not counter any of my arguments. Instead, what he did was to give context, which we know already. We all know what happened. And like I said, we thank the coalition for that, but I still maintain my position that they still did not succeed in what they sought to do.
2 minutes, Dr. Ceesay.
Before I conclude, I still like to reiterate my question to Honorable, that every Gambian wants to know, because there is so much misconception out there. The Honorable was offered a cabinet post, and he rejected. There are those who are saying, no, he wasn't offered. I think it would be fair for the Honorable to himself tell us whether he was offered a cabinet post or not. And if he was offered, why didn't he take it? And if he was not and opted to go to the National Assembly, I think I really want the Honorable to answer that question for me. Thank you.
Okay, I'll start with the question and then analyze further.
5 minutes.
I have said that the coalition must be examined in context. We've seen the fundamental objective. We're looking at the secondary objectives. The secondary objectives emerge from the recommendations of the committees. Let me just give you an example. The Committee on Good Governance indicated that the criteria on the tenure of the office of the flag bearer. That's why they said that the flag bearer shall head a transitional government for a period of 3 years. The transitional president shall be open, transparent, and accountable to all during the transition. The transitional president shall respect the views and rights of the citizens. The transitional president shall not support any party during the transition period. The transitional president shall not seek for re-election until after the 5 years after the transitional period. The transitional leader must be a unifier, good listener, team player, and easily accessible person. Each contestant shall make pledges to respect and uphold all the conditions circumscribing his or her tenure as established by the coalition. So you can see that the coalition was being weaved in progress. Imagine meeting on the 17th of October and drafting all these documents. And on the 30th, within 2 weeks, you held a convention. From 30th October to 30th November, 1 month. 30th November to 1st December, 1 day. Within 1 month, 2 days, you change power that was mightier than any power ever established in the Gambia. So you can see the sequence of events. And therefore, what you saw here, or what you see here as recommendation, should and were incorporated in what you call a draft. There's nothing like a draft document. Something was prepared for us to consider. It was never considered. And all this were incorporated in it. And that should have guided the second process. That second process is executive power situated in the Constitution. And that executive power has absolute authority to appoint ministers, to remove ministers, whilst the governance established by the coalition would have required consultation with the coalition. You'll be able to get these documents later so that you see what was prepared to guide the implementation of any recommendation made by the coalition at the level of executive power once it assumes responsibility. You've asked me the question, was I offered? On the 25th of December, you've heard the president made a statement indicating that we were going to establish an agency for sustainable socio-economic development. The agency will establish an expert bank, and all Gambians will send their curriculum vitae, which they did, many did. And from the expert bank, we'll create clusters of experts on all issues of national development. And they will make their recommendation, short, medium, long-term recommendation, before the president assumes office as a start. And those ministers who will eventually be appointed will rely on those documents to start the process of governance. I volunteered to head that agency. The documents were given to some members of the coalition to vet. Eventually, we had a consultant, pristine consultancy, go and ask the gentleman, to prepare the template to create the database for all Gambians and anybody else in the world who would wish to be part of that expert bank. Did that happen? All became chaff in the wind. So do we say that is the failure of a coalition? Is the failure of the executive assuming office and beginning to run a government like a normal government? Eventually, it was not a coalition government that came into being. It's the executive presidency that came into being.
Thank you, Honorable. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I think the media is ready, but I'd like to fire a few questions to set the ball rolling. And I'd also like to propose, as many have also asked, that at the end, each of you may choose a local language for closing remarks. Perhaps use it to summarize, if you may. Honorable Sallah, is this reasonable, Doctor?
It's reasonable.
Maybe 5 to 10 minutes in the end, so somebody will speak a Wolof or Mandinka somewhere so that we'll carry the general public along. Dr. Ceesay, my first question to you is, a dictatorship ended by the coming together of these political parties. We've seen the setting up of commissions. We've seen the National Human Rights Commission. We've seen the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We've seen reforms and change. And in fact, media freedom, proliferation of political parties. Will you not attribute all of these to success of Coalition 2016? If yes, yes. If no, 2 minutes.
Well, no to some extent. No to some extent. The TRRC is yet to be ready. We are waiting. If the TRRC's recommendations are not fully implemented, it has failed. The Janet Commission's recommendations are not been fully implemented. There is still fiscal indiscipline in this country. They suggested and recommended for 28 people to be expunged from the civil service. For taking part in sleaze, they are still serving in government. So therefore, the selective manner of the implementation of the Janet Commission, and also the things that the Janet Commission recommended have not been implemented, so that's a failure. As we saw recently, when we received these so-called COVID organics from Guinea-Bissau, a government official went to the central bank to withdraw 2.1 million from the counter, and the statutory limit was to be $100,000. So it means that for that has failed. Media freedom. It's the media that fought for it. Gambians voted. The coalition cannot take credit. That is why I think leadership has failed in the coalition. Let them come out and take responsibility as well, so that we know that, to be honest, they've taken responsibility that it has failed. But to be honest, I don't attribute the freedom to the coalition. Gambians came out to vote, and they voted out the dictator. And it was not only the success of the coalition, it is the success of every Gambian. So I wouldn't attribute that success to the coalition.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Honorable Sallah, a lot of fingers are pointed in your direction to say, you designed such a beautiful document, the coming together, unbelievable that this was possible. You guided, you molded, you've written, you've spoken, you've calmed the public, you participated, only to withdraw your support and participation after winning. That, in fact, many say, is the reason why it's not fully implemented. The objectives have not been attained because of your lack of participation yourself. Yes? No? 2 minutes.
I believe we must distinguish before you establish a government and after you establish a government. The coalition is pre-government and post-government. I have made it very clear that the coalition ceased to exist once executive power was assumed. You started to have a normal government. That is the reality. And when you have a novel government, the president will consult, the UDP will consult all the other parties, PPP, etc., and say, I'm offering you this ministerial post. If they accept, then that becomes their post. Then to look into all the provinces, people with the expertise, and appoint them as ministers. That's executive presidency. I will not take account for anything that went wrong after the assumption of office, because nobody consulted me on how to run a government after that. That is the point. Secondly, we assumed as DOI that we could move into a coalition trajectory by having a National Assembly, which was Coalition National Assembly. But that didn't happen. And I must ask Dr. Ceesay and all the other people who talked about the failure, why didn't they stand for National Assembly elections? It was open to every Gambian to go and stand and be a National Assembly member because the coalition did not exist anymore. We did not participate as coalition members in the National Assembly election. Every single Gambian could have participated. Why did you not participate to save this country,
Time.
to give clout to the National Assembly.
You want to borrow a second 2 minutes?
2 minutes, yes.
Go ahead.
So in essence, it is easy to indict, but very difficult to assume responsibility. I did not run away. I saw what was happening. I knew what I could do and what I could not do. And I continued to assist the president to the best of my ability in the decision-making process until it was time to go and contest for a National Assembly seat. And I went and contested because I knew that in that National Assembly, this is where we are going to serve as oversight, to continue to expose what is wrong and show what is right. It is now left to the executive to accept what is right and abandon what is wrong, failing which I can now stand and say, this is an executive that needs to be changed. And I will have the moral authority to say that. Now I have moral authority to say, this executive needs to be changed, there is need for system change, and nobody can question me.
Thank you, Honorable Sallah. Dr. Ismaila, everybody, well, not everybody, I'm exaggerating here. A few people had said, well, Dr. Ismail Assisi himself is a product of the success of the coalition 2016. He's standing here today as head of a political party, which may not have existed if Jammeh was still president. What do you say to that 2 minutes?
How many parties were registered when Jammeh was in power? A few. GPDP was registered when Jammeh was in power. GMC was registered when Jammeh was in power. So Jammeh's being in power did not inhibit anyone from registering a political party. Even if Jammeh was in power post-2016 and CA wanted to register a political party and follow the procedures, I think we would have still registered a political party. So that excuse, that rationale, that argument is really weak because there is evidence that parties were registered when Jammeh was in power.
That's it. Honorable Sallah, a lot of people also are saying, I'm sharing a lot of opinion here today, of course, that if you had any opportunity now, you, and by extension, DOI, may not consider coming together with other parties as a result of the failure and disappointment that you may have experienced in 2016. Yes, no, 2 minutes.
2006, I was made a NAT coalition candidate. Upper Salum, Lower Salum was supposed to be handled by some of the NAT members. One went to the UK. The other, after we fixed his transport, decided to move to the APRC. So if it is just sabotaging the progress of DOI, that should have been the end. But in 2011, we supported the United Front and had 11% of the vote to the UDP 17%. And some are saying, well, it is the UDP who enabled the coalition to win. But here, 2011, 17%, 11% for the United Front and rising. So essentially, in 2016, if you follow how the elections went for the candidate, I could have protested. You've heard all the coalition leaders saying, Dr. Ceesay is saying that, yes, a party has been registered, but where was the GMC leader when we were establishing the coalition? Where was the GPDP leader when we were establishing the coalition? All had left the country. This was not a safe ground for genuine multi-party contest. That is the reality. Let's accept that fact. The coalition has changed, has shifted. You see, development is not always planned. Sometimes it can be spontaneous. Sometimes it can be incidental. What is incidental to the change is not the plan that some of us had. But today you have a judiciary that can stand and say, this independent National Assembly member has been removed by the executive. Go back to the National Assembly. That is the progress that the country has made. For a civil society organization to say, 54 million, you have not done it according to the Constitution. To the court, removed. That's what we should take into consideration. That because of the environment that has been created, Gambia has indeed changed. But it's not necessarily a change of system.
Time, sir.
We must now move to the next change.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Ismail Assisi, my last question to you, and I'll have a last final question to Honorable Sallah before we go to Keba and media here. 2021, December is around the corner. Will you, via Citizens Alliance, consider coming together with other like-minded political parties, seemingly 20 presidential candidates or more? We have 18 registered. We have 2, 3, 4 independents considering. Are you imagining forming some sort of an alliance, some sort of a coalition for 2021?
Well, we at CA don't believe in forming alliances just to remove an incumbent. We believe in being part of alliances that will bring change, sustainable change. Removing the incumbent is one job, like I've said. Changing is another. So we'll have to consider those things. The agenda must be right and genuine. The framework must be right. Policies and platforms and visions must align. Then maybe perhaps we can start discussions. But for now, we will not engage or take part in any coalition just for the sake of changing incumbent and replacing that incumbent with another incumbent, and yet there will be no sustainable development or change in this country. Thank you.
Honorable Sallah, you talk very passionately about system change, system change, system change. What is system change? And can you bring us system change? 2 minutes.
We've seen that sovereignty resides in the people of the Gambia. But look at our division into ethno-linguistic groups, into religious groups, into all sectors of society. That is what we intend to change, to unify the Gambian nation, so that we know that sovereignty resides in each of us, and collectively we must exercise that power to control the resources of the land in order to eradicate poverty, eradicate injustice, eradicate ignorance. The ocean belongs to us. Look at Batakunkusanya and Kato. They are mining. First Republic is like Gambia is just a groundnut country. Nothing is here. Second Republic, they discovered that. But they were mining and selling, and nobody knew what they were doing with it. Current situation, license, and you take control of what belongs to the Gambian people. We are saying system change means that what is there, the minerals, belong to the people. If you're going to give a percent, maybe 10%, but the 90% or more must be owned by the people, you will take that, put it in a central bank, into a cooperative fund, which you can now utilize to provide that child who comes from GTTI and has no means of production. You will say, here is what you can use to go and mill the cows, provide some form of processing. That is what we are talking about. You will utilize that to give it to the farmer, where you'll have the seed, fertilizer, and farming implement for the farmer, and they will pay back into the cooperative bank exactly what you've given them. It's a revolving fund. We are saying that you move to the person who also want to buy those goods to market, so that in doing so, the cooperative bank will give them with the means to be able to do the purchasing, so that they'll be able to sell. We believe that that process will create a Gambia owned by the people, resources owned by us.
Thank you, sir. Now I hand over the baton to Keba Kamara to coordinate with the media. Everyone can ask a direct question, not longer than a minute, not more than a question. And then you can ask a direct question. First question must be addressed to Dr. Ceesay. Second, to Honorable Sallah, and we will do it that way. We will not repeat or continue to ask one participant. So we'll pass the baton, ping pong, to each. So first question must be addressed to Dr. Ceesay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Drame. We've also seen some party militants here. I'm not sure whether they are allowed to ask questions.
Absolutely. I think everybody here should be able to, but let's prioritize media. It's a media event.
Each media house, one question.
Yes, sir.
Should not be more than 1 minute.
Yes.
Those are the rules.
And not more than a question. And
Thank
must be addressed to Ismail Assisi for the first one.
Thank you.
Keba is coordinating. It's his choice.
Second question. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yankuba Jallo, Foreign Newspaper, sir. Sir, you have faulted the coalition for not taking steps to take the matter to court to enforce the agreement. When the Supreme law of the land, the Constitution, does not provide any base to compel someone to resign. So what would have been, why should the coalition take the agreement to court when the Supreme Court gives the president 5-year mandate?
The 5-year mandate is guaranteed by Section 65 of the Constitution, I believe, which says that the president has a mandate of 5 years. But the same Constitution, Section 63, also gives the president the latitude to resign anytime when he wants to resign, and that will not violate the Constitution. So the idea was that there was an agreement that was signed that became a contractual agreement. So therefore, I see no reason why that could have not been tested in the courts to see whether there was a breach of contract by the person who did breach the contract. That has nothing to do with the Supreme Court. It's very clear. If President Barrow had decided to resign after the 3 years, serving for 3 years, he would not have violated the Constitution because there are provisions that you could resign as president. So I saw no reason why that could not have been tested in the courts.
Lady?
Thank you very much. Well, Dr. Ceesay. I am Abdullah Dabo.
The question must be to Honorable Sallah.
Okay, sorry. I am Abdullah Dabo from Paradise TV. My question to you, Mr. Sallah, is the fact that the executive of the coalition failed to attain a certain goal or some of their goals. Isn't it worth saying that the coalition failed in that aspect because almost all the coalition members were given an executive post? Honorable Sallah, don't you see that there is a collective responsibility in this?
Well, what I have said, the coalition was designed to remove a person from office. It succeeded in doing that. To ensure a peaceful transfer of power. It succeeded in doing that. After that, we had recommendation as to what should happen. But that cannot be supreme because you have a constitution and the person who is elected would govern according to the constitution. I would come to agree with Dr. Ceesay that we have not fouled the constitution because Section 65 does say that the person can resign and that could be in 2 days or 3, etc. I am emphasizing to you that my recommendation to establish an agency for sustainable socio-economic development did not go very far prior to the assumption of office by the president. If that has not gone very far, what is the use of me assuming a ministerial post when I was recommending something much grander? Imagine an expert bank where all Gambians would have been involved in managing the affairs of this country. If that is rejected, what is there for me in a ministerial post? The president would not give me a ministerial post, would not offer me a ministerial post because I was his spokesperson. I had to demand for something. He would not know what I want. But I have to look at the situation and see what was going on. Would it have been moral for me to demand from the president that give me the position of vice president? Many people were saying, this is the man who should be the vice president of the country. Would it have been moral for me to actually demand for that position? What position should I have demanded for? What position should he have given me? I ask you people. But that president knows that my motive, which I declared to the Inspector General of Police when I went there after the victory, that the president, the incoming president is under threat. And you are the people who must defend the outgoing president and the incoming president. That for me, I told the Inspector General, he's still alive. that for me, I have no vested interest because I will never be a minister in this government because I wanted moral authority.
Thank you. Does anyone have a question for Dr. Ceesay? Kerr, here.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you. I would have loved both participants, but Dr. C. Okay. Yeah. All right. My question is, both of you have made valid arguments, and I want to know what your opponent has said that you agree with.
Well, apart from the fact that the first phase of the objective of the coalition had succeeded, that is, they were able to change government peacefully. I agree with that.
Honorable Sallah?
I have seen an attempt for us to try to have a holistic view of coalition prior to assumption of office and coalition thereafter. I believe some facts are missing, and with an analytical mind, if those facts are present, I believe the conclusion which Dr. Ceesay made would not be made, that is a blanket allegation that all of us are responsible for what is happening now. I beg to differ in that regard.
Thank you very much. Rebuttal. I'm speaking here as a citizen, not as president of the Bar Association. This question I would like to put to Honorable Sallah.
Sorry. Okay. You may do two, but let's do doctor. It's
okay, very well. Turn. Very well. The doctor said that the coalition should have tested the courts by perhaps litigating over the breach or alleged breach of contract of the incumbent. Dr. Ceesay, have you sought legal advice as to whether or not an agreement of this manner is justiciable, given that the Constitution stipulates what the mandate is? And secondly, do you think that the coalition, in coming to this agreement or recommendation, as the case may be, averted their mind to the constitutional provision, and also what to do in the event that the incumbent does not resign? Thank you.
I got confused with the second part of the question. The first one is very clear, but the second part I got a bit confused.
Okay, the second part is, do you think that the coalition have addressed their mind to the possibility of the flag bearer not agreeing to resign, and if so, what to do about it?
Well, I would not be in the mind of the coalition members, so I cannot definitely answer that question, lest I'll be making hypotheses that I wouldn't want to do. But when it comes to the legal advice, yes, I spoke with a few lawyers to ask them about binding, whether signed agreements are legally binding. See, there are two levels here. There's a signed agreement. There's an agreement was signed that I, President Adama Barrow, agree to be part of this framework, and I agree that if I'm elected as flag bearer, I will resign from my political party, which he did. I will serve for 3 years transition, and I will resign and will not contest the elections after that. That is one. Now, the Constitution is clear that the mandate of the president is 5 years. But the same Constitution gives the president also the privilege to resign at any time he so wishes. So for me, I see nothing wrong with the president resigning from power to fulfill an obligation that he himself signed. I believe that if I was President Adama Barrow and I made a pledge, I made a commitment and I signed, and that's an obligation, I would have resigned to fulfill that pledge. Now, whether the Supreme Court would rule in favor of President Barrow or not, I wouldn't know, but for me, wouldn't have been bad to test the waters and stretch the limits and resilience of our judiciary.
Thank you, Doctor. Keba, maybe we try to get 2-3 more.
2-3 more?
Yes, I mean, I see a few hands. You may ask 2 questions, as long as you direct a question to each. I think this is possible.
Thank you very much. Yusuf Taylor for Gynaco News. My first question is to Halifa. You made a very controversial statement once. Regime change. There is no system change. Doctor has highlighted that the second part was the most important part. My question to you, Honorable, are you now saying that regime change, which brought through President Adama Barrow, is the ultimate success? My first question. Then to Doctor, we've seen Honorable Halifa has tried or attempted to run for president for a number of times and has not been successful, but he has gone into National Assembly. Will you be willing to do the same if the 2021 presidential elections are not successful for yourself? Will you be willing to do the same?
Honorable Sallah first.
Correction, when you say I've stood a number of times, I don't think that is accurate. I wanted to stand for DOI in 2016, the only time that I was nominated to stand for DOI, but you know what happened. I have never been a candidate of DOI, and DOI has only participated in 3 presidential runs. And that was 1992, 1997, and 2001. Since that period, we have been promoting coalition building. You've mentioned that I made a controversial statement. I don't know what is controversial about that. We see the poverty in the country. Go to the market now. What is the price of meat? What is the price of rice? What is the price of food? Is that system change? How many people? Over 500,000 young people come out of our school system every 12 years. What is the possibility for them to get work? Is that system change? I emphasize that the coalition was not designed to ensure system change. It is a transitional instrument to shape the Constitution, shape the institutions, carry out the reforms so that we have a foundation for a leap forward. That was the objective. Even that objective has not been attained. My argument with Dr. Ceesay is that he is putting the coalition as a continuous organ for government. I am saying there was discontinuity after the assumption of executive power. That's my argument. And that discontinuity must be seen to be responsible for what is happening here. And I am not part of that. That's my position.
Dr. Ceesay?
What's the question? He said I didn't answer his question, please.
Let's allow him to do a follow-up, just to be sure that the point is clear. Keva, yes. Can we get to Flex? It's his right to get clarity. So we'll give 2 minutes so that he's clear.
It's simple. And the reason why I said it's controversial, the president picked it up, and it was a controversial issue. The question, are you now saying that regime change, which brought through President Adama Barrow, is successful? That's what I'm asking.
That's precisely what I'm saying. That you had Jammeh here. We removed him in peace. That's what I'm saying. That's successful. What bigger success is that? 52 years, your country had never changed through the ballot box. This was the first time in history for your country to change through the ballot box. You say that's not successful? That gave you a starting point. That's why the media is here today. You know what was happening during the impasse. My friend is here, Mr. Tal. He knows what happened. Gambia has decided. What happened? No, it's not about what you say. This is the mediocrity. Who will stand against arms? It's not about running away. The issue is that there was a desire to emphasize the change that had occurred, but the might of the state was still in the hands of a transitional president. And we changed that, and he left in peace. And that is what we must appreciate.
Dr. Ceesay, would you want a repeat of the question, or you're okay?
No, I think the question is very clear.
Go ahead.
Is that an assumption that if she doesn't win the elections, that whether I would be ready to go to the National Assembly? Well, I wouldn't be in a situation to make that decision now. My focus is on the presidential elections, and that is what I'm working towards. So I cannot be aiming for the Premier League and start thinking that about relegation to the championship.
So how many more questions, Mr. Durrani? How many more questions?
I think we still have time, so please, let's get a few more questions in.
Greetings, everyone. I have a question for Dr. Ismail Assisi. I see him giggling when Halifa makes a statement about the Gonga, which is the economic corporate model of DOI. Mr. Sallah, Honorable Sallah made it very clear that the public sector is the one mandated, according to their vision, to be the trustee of the wealth of the nation. And through the corporate model, the public sector or the state would be responsible for the marine, terrestrial, and atmospheric resources of the state. Yes, very direct. Mm-hmm. I want to know if this corporate model of economic operation has been successful and could align with your economic model as a party, and what are the gaps in terms of differences? Thank you.
So there are three questions: whether it has been successful, whether it aligns with our economic policy, and what else? Are the different? Obviously, I mean, the cooperative model has different variances depending on the level of the intervention of the state, whether it's cooperative is operating within a centrally planned economy or within the context of a free market economy. And if I understand the DOIS Gonga, they are building a productive corporate base, which will be obviously facilitated by public enterprises. Therefore, I think the Honorable can correct me if I'm wrong, it's about the state, a centrally planned cooperative system. Where we differ is that we believe in the power of the private sector. We believe in the free market economy, because we believe that the free market breeds competition, which breeds innovation and ingenuity, and therefore which helps the economy to thrive and create jobs. We believe that global capital is necessary because today we live in a hyper-economic world. The person who attracts, wields, and spends global capital wisely will be in a position to transform their societies in a very short period of time. So therefore, we don't mind having a cooperative system, but not within the framework of a centrally planned economy, but within the framework of a free market economy. That is why the differences are. So you could call CA, perhaps, socialist-oriented, insofar as the distribution of national wealth is concerned, in accordance with the principles of fairness and solidarity. But how would we generate that wealth? We want to create the enabling environment, get the right legal frameworks, build knowledge economy, build human capital, build infrastructure to attract, within that can create jobs and that can also bring in wealth needed to invest.
You may borrow 2 minutes if you like.
I'm fine.
You're fine. Okay.
Dr. Ceesay said he did not see the coalition agreement.
What I didn't want is happening now. I don't want all questions to be focused on one. Do you have a question for Honorable Sallah? If not, we'll go to somebody else and come back.
I think we've also broken the rules. The idea was that the media only will ask questions and not party militants.
Oh, that's a party militant. Okay.
So therefore,
no, Haruna, I think you said party, as far as everybody.
Participants.
Yeah, participants can also ask.
Yes, but the email was only media will ask questions, the press, and not party militants, and not party.
But I may not be able to identify who is a party
well,
militant.
they can introduce themselves to say, I'm from this media house.
Well, when you say it's only media house, we can do that. We can control that. What are we going to do now?
Wait, let's have
But so many people ask questions here, and they are not actually from media houses.
Which has already happened.
Which have already happened, yes.
But let's respect his opinion of party militants not asking questions.
Okay.
So ordinary Gambians and media persons can ask questions. Perhaps.
That's a problem as well. How do we differentiate between party militants and ordinary Gambians? Let's stick to the rules, Haruna.
Let's go back to only media.
Only media.
I don't want to be accused of anything because we've laid the rules ahead of the debate. So let's stick to that. Only media. I think, Keba, you would recognize everybody from a media house.
So media houses want to ask again. Is that possible?
Well, if a fresh hand is not up.
No.
If a fresh hand is not up. Are there some fresh hands that didn't ask before? If not, then we'll go back. Can you please stand up? We're not seeing the person.
Yes.
Please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Fatou Samba. I work for the Gambian Talents TV. And my question goes to Honorable Sallah. A lot of people say you are generally angry, and that is why you are responding to every single question that people talk about you. Some people say you are childish to respond to every individual who says everything about you, including ordinary Gambians, and that will delay your process. A leader, let's talk the talk, walk the walk, whilst others talk. What is your response to those who believe that Halifa Sallah, when elected into office, will be busy responding to every Gambian comments made against him instead of walking?
Well, I think
you said two questions.
I think that is what democracy is all about.
Let's go. Let him respond, and then you may ask Dr. Ismaila directly right after his response.
If leaders are not responsive to the questions of those people they lead, I don't know what type of leaders they are. If they think that they are above the people who elect them, I don't know what type of leaders they are. If those who are led believe that their leaders are above them and they should not raise questions and debate with them, I don't know what type of people we have. We are building a sovereign country with a sovereign people. People who know that leaders are not rulers. They are servants of the people. And they must answer to their every question so that they are clear on who they are supporting and for what. So those people who make those statements are entitled to them. I do not argue with opinions. I respect them.
Second question for Doctor.
All right, Dr. Ismaila, the question is, you made 10 promises recently to the Gambians, and this is what you said. How do you intend to fulfill this agreement? President Barrow and some coalition government officials or some coalition members made several promises to Gambians, and they did not fulfill it.
I think he knows there are 10 points.
Yes. So we want to know whether he will just make promises just like anybody and without fulfilling it. They said 3 years, and the 3 years is not fulfilled.
Well, I will not make 10 promises if I know I cannot fulfill 10 promises. If I had known that I can only fulfill one promise, I would have made only one promise. Because I know I can fulfill the 10 promises. That is why I made 10 promises. Thank you.
Media house. Journalist.
I can continue here. We've gone about just under 90 minutes. And for fair play, I have a question here. Maybe I'll go with you, Honorable Sallah. And the question really is sent to me, I don't want to name a person, but it said, would you consider the 2016 coalition agreement as a good model for future alliances with political parties?
Well, the model was based on a challenge that there was no level ground for multi-party contests. There is no second round of voting. If you have constitutional reform where you have second round of voting, well, it means that all parties will be able to participate, and then coalitions can be built on the basis of who is the front runner after an election. But where you do not have a level ground and the incumbent is becoming more and more entrenched, then of course Coalition 2016 would be a model. But where you have a second round of voting, that would not be the case. But in the instance of the Gambia, we must accept that regime change is not enough for the vast majority of people. What people really want is an end to their suffering. So it means that the type of coalition that could be formed must be coalition that will lead to a system change, that will lead to addressing the needs of the people.
Thank you, Honorable. Dr. Ismaila, one of the cardinal and central components of the Coalition 2016 is civil service reform. What are your views on it so far, 4 years in?
Well, the civil service reform wasn't even initiated yet because we still have the same bloated, inefficient civil service. So no reform took place in that front. And that is why if you look at our 10-point plan, number one, we are promising to diversify the economy, to make sure that there is growth, provide jobs, reform the civil service and state-owned enterprises, and eradicate corruption. So we take civil service reform very seriously. We need to motivate and bring incentives. We need to set standards within the civil service. We need to ensure we digitize the civil service so it is more efficient, so that people are, the civil service is supposed to serve the public. That is why they call it the civil service. But for now, it is failing in that front. And we need to reinvigorate and revitalize the civil service so that it is fit for purpose.
Honorable Sallah, somebody just texted me now to say, if you say that regime change is not enough, are you in fact not agreeing with Dr. Ceesay's position?
I believe we have agreed in one instance where he said that the type of alliance that should be built for 2021 must be aimed at changing a system. I don't know whether the person questioning is tilting towards that. But if it is simply saying that I was maybe implying that there was system change in 2016,
no, regime change.
That there was...
That you agree that regime change is not enough.
Well,
now, are you in fact then agreeing with Dr. Ceesay?
I don't know whether it's agreeing, but I think I have declared this since 2017, that there has been regime change and it's not enough. So I don't think I'm stating anything new. I'm stating what I have always stated, that regime change is not enough, but in the circumstances, it was the only thing that could move Gambia to the next level. Without it, we would have been elsewhere.
Dr. Ismail Assisi, is it fair to say that Coalition 2016 is a complete failure, given that without the Coalition 2016, Jammeh would still be in power?
Well, I think we need to understand that Jammeh being in power is not the issue. It's about changing Jammeh and bringing someone who will do things differently, who will change and transform the country that Jammeh did not do. As we speak, we are going for elections in a couple of months' time. We still don't have term limits in the Constitution, and that was why we are calling for electoral reforms. There is still no 50+1. We're still going for simple majority. That is why we are calling for electoral reforms. The diaspora will not vote. That is what we are calling for electoral reforms. So, and the Honorable had said that if you go to the market, people are suffering in this country. So what has changed? What has regime change brought to Gambia? Apart from the fact that, yes, we'll come here and speak our minds and debate without the NIA taking us to Bambadinka.
Now, you may ask, Flex, we will come to you. I think Flex wants a question. But you may ask each other a direct question. Honorable Sallah, would you have a question that you want clarity on based on his...
Yes. I was surprised when he said that the civil service is bloated, meaning that the objective is to reduce it. Because what I have seen is that we do not even have the type of civil service that can currently address the challenges. Look at the hospitals. How many doctors, how many nurses? Look at the number of qualified teachers. Look at the number of... I don't think we have enough people who should render service. And the type of economy he's talking about, it leads to contraction, economic contraction. And it leads to retrenchment of civil servants, because you are not building the productive base. Where will he get the money to run an enlarged civil service? He does not know where to get it. And that is why what they are recommending is to retrench. Feel that the civil service is bloated, so you must actually reduce it. Is that not his position?
When I say it is bloated, I mean it is overstaffed. And that we need to streamline the civil service and do what they call RRR. We retrench, we retrain, and we reintegrate. Because now what's happening within the civil service, we still have people called messengers in the civil service. We still have drivers in the civil service. We need to reform it so that some of the services that the civil service need, especially in the offices, can be served by the private sector. Why have the paramilitary guarding the public installations and not giving it to private security firms? Why have the civil government employing people to clean offices and not outsourcing it to private cleaning firms? This creates jobs, and it also helps formalize the very large informal economy. So my argument is that the civil service is too big. It is not fit for purpose. We need to find a way to streamline it, to make it more effective by also bringing what they call a confluence of the civil service and technology to bring more efficiency.
Does that answer the question, Honorable?
Well, it doesn't. I'm in fact wondering. The issue he mentioned is that you will retrench, retrain, and then put them back there. So it means that...
Reintegrate means that take them to other places where they can be more productive.
So the problem is not because it's big, it's because they are not trained. You believe that you need further training.
For clarity, are we talking about quantity or quality?
That is what I'm saying.
I think
yes, that's the issue.
Let's find a convergence
Yes,
here.
that's what it is.
If it's bloated, are you saying it's so many incompetent people?
Not incompetent,
so
but some people who are not serving any purpose in the civil service must be removed from the civil service and they train for other sectors. There are other sectors that need people. Today, as we speak, in our 10-point plan, we made a pledge that we are going to provide 100,000 jobs within 5 years. Now, the Gambia has the potential to tap the power of the services sector. If you look at the Gambia's position, it is strategically located, similar to Djibouti along the Red Sea, just that Djibouti is inside Ethiopia, and today they are one of the most vibrant maritime service industries. Now, Gambia today, we can bring innovative solutions and new products to really increase tourist arrivals from roughly 200,000 to 1 million tourists.
Is your issue here about quality at the same time? And the numbers, both of them.
We need quality.
So we need to train and equip and qualify.
Of course. So because it's
and
supposed to
then
serve
also cut the numbers down and send a lot of people to the private sector.
But that is why we are saying civil service reform.
Does that answer your question, Honorable?
Overall.
In fact, I'm getting more and more confused, because what I'm beginning to question is whether really the plan is to eradicate poverty in the Gambia. What I am beginning to hear is increasing really if you look at the pay that the civil servants are receiving now, and you look at the package, and with that you believe that you are going to reduce and you expect that you are saving something that will facilitate greater development.
But the purpose of reduction is not to save.
Let him complete. Let him complete, sir. Let him complete. Go ahead, sir.
So essentially, what I'm being told is that there is no answer to the poverty of the country. And if that is added to the whole issue that you are bringing a free market. Where is the free market in the Gambia? For 56 years, every government aimed to build a free market. How many people are actually earning to have business in this country that can employ the type of population that he's talking about? Where is the free market in the Gambia?
Can I ask a question to the Honorable?
Yes. No, you may answer. You may answer. Where is the free market?
The free market is existing. It's just that its potential has not been maximized because the enabling environment was not created by the government, but by previous governments. We did not build human capital, which is a prerequisite to have a vibrant free market system that brings in wealth. We did not build the relevant infrastructure, which is a prerequisite. We did not also get the right legal frameworks to fight corruption so that investors can have confidence in the market and bring in global wealth. So you don't blame the free market for that. You blame the ineffective, corrupt, and inefficient governments for that, and not the free market itself.
So where will these people invest when they come? Do you see the land? Are they going to invest in land?
Well, there are many sectors. Investors
like which sector, for example?
Services sector, in the agricultural sector.
Service, you already have AfriShell, you have all these telecommunication system.
There is communication,
give
there
us.
is tourism.
Let's allow him to respond.
Yeah. There is tourism, there is tech, there is banking, there is insurance. So the service sector is not all about telecommunications.
You see, the service sector is a sector which employs very few because of high tech. Any efficient service sector will not be talking about increasing employment. It's not a sector that employs. It's a sector that relies on technology. It replaces human beings. That is the reality. So the service sector is necessary. The private sector is necessary, but the private sector in this country cannot grow to a level where you can have eradication of poverty. The difference between Gambia and Sweden and Norway, etc., you had a private sector that blossomed to a point that you can tax the private sector in order to provide for those who are not employed, in order to provide for those who have more children, in order to provide those who are elderly, so you can provide social welfare. But the difference between those countries and this country is that we do not have a private sector to tax because they are already overtaxed. And you cannot do anything to that private sector to be able to provide what you need to deal with poverty. So what we are saying is that, yes, you have consumption-based welfare for countries that have big private sector to tax, but you must have production-based welfare for countries that do not have that. And that's why you must have a cooperative bank in order to provide that resource that the farmer needs, farming implement fertilizer, so that they will be able to. That's the type of
what the Honorable Doctor, we'll give you 2 minutes to respond. We'll give you 2 minutes to respond, so we conclude this, then your question to him.
Yeah,
2 minutes to respond, then you ask your question.
No, but he owes me a question. He asked me a question and I answered.
No, that's what I mean.
Yeah. All right, okay,
you will take 2 minutes now, so that we'll conclude this point, and then you ask him a direct question.
In my 2 minutes?
No. After your 2 minutes, you can ask him a direct question.
All right, that's fine. What I'm trying to say is that the system that he's talking about, that DOI is talking about as in the Gonga, has been tried elsewhere and it has failed. I think the system that they are saying is a repackaged communism of the 21st century. It cannot work, it has not worked, it has failed. Countries that are able to transform their societies within a very short period of time relied on the expansion of the private sector and attracting global capital. The Rwandas, the South Africas, after apartheid, Mandela himself, who at once was very left-wing leaning, in fact befriending Fidel Castro, when he became president, he changed course and started orienting